Dion, thanks so much for joining me today. I want to talk about placing tenants. Vacancy can make or break your cash flow. So today I want to talk about how you place a tenant in under 20 days. And what have you learned over time being a successful real estate investor who's grown your portfolio from zero to how many rentals do you have today?
Today, only 18.
18 rentals. That's only 18 is a lot more than majority of investors out there. So tell us about it. Tell me a little bit about what you used to do with finding and placing a tenant and how you're doing it today.
In the beginning, I made the huge mistake that a lot of landlords do, where when you're starting out and you're dipping your toes into it, you don't feel like you're a real landlord. So I broke all the rules. I didn't use a lease. I didn't want to rent to a stranger because who can trust a stranger? So I rented to a friend. And it blew up in my face. In my first year, I lost money. And then I educated myself. I found places like the One Rental at a Time community, educated myself, got into podcasts and audiobooks. And I found out that, it was a lot of work in the beginning. It felt like 20 hours a week to manage one tenant. And now I have it down to about 2 hours a month to manage 18 tenants. So in the beginning, to advertise a property, I would try Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist or Zillow or cozy.co, which was purchased by apartments.com. And each platform is very different. And I'm not too tech savvy. I don't have a 10-year-old around to help me with the tech all the time. And so it was always a struggle.
Yeah.
And I would get really good at one platform and then it would go away. Cozy was purchased and disappeared. I tried apartments.com for a little while and it just didn't work because in my market, Zillow was used more. But in other markets, I've seen apartments.com be more used. And in the last, I want to say I started using Hemlane about 4 years ago, 2021. Yeah, so about 4 years ago. And so I had at the time 16 rental units. And I didn't just go to all of my tenants and say, hey, there's a new platform. You'll have to get on here. I've got some tenants that are a little older, have a flip phone, don't have the internet at their house. So I didn't go to them and say, hey, you need to go get this app and learn how to do this. But every time I've had a tenant turnover or purchased a new place, I've used Hemlane to put tenants in place or to manage the property through the platform. And I put the information in once. Like this has been the deal maker for me. I didn't have to learn how apartments.com worked and Zillow worked and Craigslist worked and
Zumper and Realtor.com and all of them.
Right, all of the ones. So that's the thing. I don't even know how many platforms there are or what they're named or what this data, because for me, it took maybe 15 minutes to get my information in, put my pictures in, and I list the listing and I get all of the responses from all the different platforms because Hemlane did the work of figuring out how each one of those works and how to get the information on all of them. And so I think the last time I checked, it was posted on 30 platforms. Mm-hmm. Is that still accurate? Yeah, 30.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's we went from 30 down to 15 for the number of platforms we list on. And here's why. Maintaining those other 15, we would find that it got fewer than 0.5% of leads. And so with SEO optimization, consolidation of rental listing websites out there, you actually only need to be on the top 15, which sort of makes sense, right? Because if you think of Google or the App Store, there's like 10 on the first page and everything else is just, spam that comes through. And then we also found with all those additional listing websites that what you would find happen is the leads were not qualified. It was kind of spam or something like that. And so once we consolidated it, we found you could place tenants faster because it was very qualified and you knew the tenants coming in were actual legit tenants looking, not bots. So it's a little bit of background on it. But yes, all those major listing websites.
Okay. And so that's what makes it work for me is it was easy tech to understand. I didn't have to learn multiple forms, but I get to list on multiple forms. And what I found, there's different markets, different ones work better in different markets, I'm sure, but I don't have to know which one works in my market. I don't have to gamble on, am I spending my time on the right platforms? I just put it in once. It's on all the platforms that are used. And an example is we had a tenant move out in December, so just before Christmas, helped them buy a house, found them an agent and a lender, and they bought a house. And I put the listing up. There was some repairs and maintenance to be done. The struggle isn't finding tenants. The struggle is filtering through to the ones you want to rent to.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do open house format version for tours. And this is all things I can do while I'm here. I can handle it. And so it went really well. We had a new tenant go in. I think it took us 4 days, I think. So we listed on the listing on like a Wednesday. Saturday we did the showing. We leased it at the showing. So it was technically on the market for 4 days to be leased out. And the reason I'm using Hemline is because I retired with rentals not to create another job. I retired with rentals to be able to travel. And so this summer I'm going to be in Scotland. In the winter, I'm planning on being in Thailand. I scuba dive wherever the good water is.
Yeah.
And everything I did for this rental, I could have done without going to the rental.
Yeah.
Because I'm using the Hemline system where, yes, I went and did the tours and I did the leasing signing, but when I'm traveling for that month, I can step up in tier to the version that handles all of that. But I don't have to maintain that all year. I can just do it for when I know there's going to be a tenant turnover. And so I have a lot more confidence in my ability to travel and spend less time hands-on on my portfolio because I'm using Hemline.
I love that. And I mean, that's why we built it, is that flexibility. It's options, and one size does not fit all for everyone, right? And so you have to think, okay, I can show the property myself and use Hemline and have it perfectly transparent. I can use self-guided tours, which actually is our fastest growing. And I can remotely understand what's going on with those tours. How many people saw it today? What did they think of it? Because we still have someone on the call with them as they're touring the property. Or you can say, you know what? I actually need an agent to show the property. Whether it's a furnished rental or you think the showings are going to be too far apart that you want someone there checking in on the place. I think there's these various different options. And so glad to hear that.
Yeah. And the reason it's so important to me is there are so many landlords that I talk to that think they want to have a property manager. And if I had a property manager, I probably would have had to work another decade to get to where I was, because you're just at odds with the property managers. As a landlord, I want limited tenant turnover. And so I actually don't want to be good at listing, and I don't want to be good at showing tenants.
Yeah.
And all these things. It's nice if there's a system to where I can do it to where it doesn't really hinder me. But a property management company makes money on tenant turnover.
Yeah.
They make money by wanting tenants to leave. And so finding a system where I can travel and I can self-manage my properties basically allowed me to retire 10 years sooner than I would have had to.
Yeah, I love that. I think aligning and, to your point, tenant turner, a property manager makes about the same amount of money as they make in a year of management fees. And for you want to mitigate that. And so I love that you do 24-month leases and other things to really make sure that the tenants stay for longer and you have fewer turnovers. Dion, I have a question for you. What about applications, background, and credit check? Walk me through some of the tips and tricks you have.
It's actually one of the really common questions we get when anybody talks to us who's just starting in real estate. First they say, well, how do you do that? How do you pull someone's credit? Because if you're around my age, you remember it used to be a really difficult thing to do, even to pull your own credit. And so going through the Hemline platform, since it uses the different, Zillow and apartments.com and those platforms, it pulls the information that you need. So not only do you get the credit report, you get the credit history, because most of us as landlords will have a credit requirement where we're thinking number. But then there's also a story to it. And if it's a little low, why? Is there a reason? But it could be all in the data that's in that credit history. And then with eviction history, it seems like pulling that data would be a barrier to a lot of people, like knowing which county websites to go to or which ones are tied into the state. But since it all goes through Hemline and you all get it in one report that I've honestly gone through and done on my phone and never needed a laptop. I've been on like in Vegas looking at things, and where we are today at the One Rental at a Time event. And I can actually look at people's applications on my phone, go through their credit history, credit background. It does everything really good. It verifies work employment. The one step that I like doing myself that works for me with the Hemline is to verify work. I think work information is the easiest thing to fabricate. Yeah. And so I'll never use the provided information of the person's name or the number. I will figure out the company's website, contact them, ask for HR, do a verification that way. So it's the one thing that I do that's a little outside of Hemline, but everything else provided through the platform gives me all the information I need. There's one step to verifying your tenants that I think is the most important that most people overlook, and it's how they communicate. So how long does it take to get a response? Is the response legible? And does it pertain to the thing that you were asking? And so it's harder to put a number on, this is the credit score I want, and I don't want no evictions.
Yeah.
But how do you put a name on how do they communicate is whether I'm going to rent to them or not. And for me, it's been pretty easy because no matter what platform they're coming on, communicating on, the communications all look the same to me. So if I'm talking to different tenants, applicants, one's used Zillow, one's used Apartments, one's on PadSplit or something. To me, it comes in the same format.
Yep.
So I'm literally just looking at the message and not learning a different format for communication.
One thing that we did, this was I think 2 or 3 years ago, was we worked with all those listing websites to make sure that we had authorization to send those tenants text messages. So whenever you send a message in, a lot of tenants don't check email these days. And so making sure that legally we were able to shoot them off a text message, even if they came in through Zillow or apartments.com, to say, Dion has this follow-up question, or Dion would like to see if you can view the property tomorrow. And that actually did huge wonders for tenant response rates that we found, and just overall closing the days on market. I also want to bring up the background and credit checks, and we do the income verification. It's very interesting because if you follow the laws, it's actually starting to get more and more challenging to do those, and even more and more challenging to get them in real time. And so to your point with like the county records, a lot of users won't know this. There's some counties where we can pull the records instantly. There's others where we actually have to contact someone and get the documents and then get them uploaded into the system. So used to be 4 reports, or 1 report, now it's 4 different clicks for it. And part of the reason are some of these legal requirements that we try to say, you don't need to know everything about all of these legal requirements and how we can get this information, but we work through it.
Yeah, so that's really important to investors because when it comes to taxes, the first year somebody owns a rental, I recommend getting a CPA. And
Yes.
It's not because there's going to be so much information or data that it's really challenging. It's because there are things like different types of depreciation. And I don't actually want to learn what the different types are. I want to hire a pro who knows. So if it came to what legal ways do I have to get the information and everything that you just said, I don't want to know that. I want to know that I hired a pro who knows that and gets me the information that I can have. So thanks for doing all the work to make it easier for guys like me.
You're very welcome. Another thing I want to go over to is rental listing websites, because that is another one where I have found it's changing so drastically. And so I'm so glad you brought up Cozy. I'm a huge fan of Cozy. It was acquired by apartments.com, and a lot of landlords out there today and property managers don't really know and see the consolidation. And also, more importantly, how drastically it's changing the rental listing websites, the top ones. And so, 2 years ago, Zillow was about 70% of tenant inquiries, and 30% came from all the other listing websites. So apartments.com, Zumper, ForRent.com, Realtor.com, and the gamut. Now what we found is that other websites are coming even, are growing fast, like the Redfin network. And so it's really cool to see that and see how much those are changing to basically say, okay, here are the ones that we need our hit list. And here is how much quality, not only in tenant inquiries, but also in approved applicants, each one is providing. The interesting one is Facebook. What do you think about Facebook Marketplace? Because we just did a huge study on Facebook Marketplace and tenant leads. Do you think that that has good qualified tenants or potentially not? And I'm talking nationwide because we did it in multiple different markets, 10 different markets.
So personal experience before using Hemlane.
Yeah.
I was using Cozy. I went to Zillow and I had tried Facebook Marketplace a couple of times.
Okay.
The first listing I posted, I was flagged and banned for 30 days.
Oh my gosh.
Never explained why. And then a whole bunch of bad comments from people who just hate landlords.
Oh, no.
So my personal experience with Facebook Marketplace wasn't so
It's
great.
bad.
So when I looked at Hemlane and I thought, oh, they advertise on there.
Yeah.
So I have a barrier, not a buffer between me and that. So I'm fine advertising on there, but I just don't want to deal with it.
Yeah.
So I don't think you would get the best results from that,
Yeah.
at least in my market.
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought that up because with Facebook Marketplace, I mean, my own personal experience with one of my rentals was I think it was like 30 inquiries in 4 hours, but 0 of those turned to qualified tenants or to applicants, or even to showings, to even just get them into a showing. And then we did it nationwide to look at it. And there were various markets where you'd get a lot of inquiries, but not qualified ones. And so it almost seemed like it was some sort of spam. And then other markets where you just got very few. And so while I think Facebook Marketplace will definitely get you, there's probably some approved applicants and some landlords have had success. I think overall focus on what's really going to move the needle, and being on those listing websites makes sense. So if you're a landlord out there and you're having difficulty on Facebook Marketplace, this may be the reason why.
Yeah, you're not alone.
Yep. Let's move on over to leases and lease agreements. I'd love to talk about some key insights that you have to give some listeners some background. We created our own lease templates, and a lot of it was to make it much more concrete. Renter's insurance required, who is responsible for what maintenance, really outlining everything and making sure the marketing listing has all that information populated in, coupled with also whatever information you have from other information that you've provided to the tenants or the tenant has provided to you, such as their application and pets. Walk through what you found most successful to put into a lease agreement.
So for me, it's really important that I wasn't the one putting the information in there. I'm not qualified and didn't want to spend the time to become knowledgeable to do it.
You don't want to be a lawyer.
Right. So what I did, and I actually learned this from my brother, who he retired with 10 paid off rentals, been retired for like a decade now. But early on, he said, the attorneys that work in your area, they're going to be the ones who know what the courts here like and what they don't like. Mm-hmm. So whenever I started buying rentals, he said, take your lease to your attorney, have them look at it and say, if we ever go through an eviction together in the future, it's going to be you doing it. So what would you like in the lease to make your job easier? And so the attorney changed a few paragraphs, added a couple of things that mattered for the counties that I invest in Washington State. And that state that lease that I originally started with was from Washington State. It's down now, but it used to be called Landlord Tenant Resource Page on their website. And so I used that lease for several years. Hemlane just came out. Bigger Pockets came out with leases for every state. Hemlane just came out with leases for state and region, I believe.
And counties.
Right.
So there's specific counties, yeah.
So I did the same thing. I took the lease to the attorney. So the first one I bring in there, they made several changes. I don't remember what they were, but they said, do this and this. I took the new one to them. They didn't need to make any changes. They said, as is works. And so I think the way you put the system together, because you checked county, local ordinance stuff for that. Again, like the CPA stuff, I don't want to know how it works. I don't want to know how any of the background stuff works. I want to know I can push a button, it works. I want to know I can sleep like a baby, that I'm protected. My attorney's happy with the documents I'm signing. So again, thanks for doing that work. But that's what I would recommend. So let's say there's somebody watching and they don't use Hemlane and you have your own lease. No matter how confident you are in your lease, take it to your attorney in your area and say, maybe retain them. Say, retain them as your eviction attorney in the future, and hopefully you never go through one. But ask the attorney, just in case we ever go through an eviction together in the future, what would you change in this lease to make your job easier? And see if they do change something.
Yeah, I love that so much. I think every single lawyer will have their own opinion on the lease, as well as, the lawyers and the attorneys that we use to help review leases have their own opinions. And so I think the more that you can get lawyers to look at things, the better. I also would make the recommendation, make sure it's in layman terms. Lawyers tend to put something in terms that a tenant does not understand. And so I think from that perspective, that's important too.
Nice. Yeah. In the beginning, like I said, I overlooked the lease thing. I thought, I'm renting to a friend. Why would I need a lease? And then later I've found out many times that as long as something is referenced in the lease, it protects the tenant and the landlord.
Yep.
So the power of a good lease can't be overstated. It saved me several times where tenants asked if they could do something, and I have to be the bad person and say no, or I could say actually in the lease it says we can't do that,
Yeah.
and it's already documented.
Yeah, I love it because you had mentioned you only spend 2 hours to manage 18 tenants, 2 hours a month. And I think that's really important and indicative of how great your process is, because landlording should not be emotional. Having real estate and having passive income off of real estate shouldn't be emotional. And if you have a lease, nothing that's very concrete and very comprehensive, nothing should get emotional because you can just refer to the lease, or if there is a noise violation, refer to the local county ordinances of what exactly is the number of decibels something can be at a certain hour. And so I think as much as you can take emotion out of it by having that structure in place, the more likely you are to succeed.
Yeah, when you're dealing with tenants, I think when I'm doing a lease signing, I actually like to point out the parts of the lease that protect the tenant
Mm-hmm.
and the parts of the lease that protect me as we're doing the lease signing, so that they understand that we're entering a contract that can benefit both of us.
Yep. Which it should. It should be for both of you. Great. I want to move on over and talk about some challenging situations you've had with tenants. What are some examples of challenges you've had? How have you overcome them? And what would you have done differently as you built up your 18 unit portfolio?
Educate yourself before you start, at least to some level, right? Don't get stuck in analysis paralysis where you're always in the education format and not actually taking action. But starting off, like if you're watching this video today, I give you permission to be a landlord now. Don't wait for something to happen in the future that makes you a landlord. When I started, I didn't feel like a real landlord, so I was renting to a friend, and we didn't need a lease. And since I was a single parent and he was a single parent, when rent was late, I thought that's okay, I'll let it slide. Late became never. When I went to the house to say, hey, why are you not paying the rent? I found out he didn't live there and he had moved out and rented it to somebody else. And he had a good lease. So from day one, I would educate myself by the people who've done it. Right, you're not have to reinvent the wheel. I don't think I'm doing anything somebody else hasn't done already. There's books, there's podcasts, there's communities like One Rental at a Time that get together, share the knowledge, get as much of that knowledge that you can, so that when you get on your feet from day one, treat it like it's a professional job and have this end goal in mind. Treat your properties like you have 100, and treat your tenants like you have 1. So when you're just starting out and you have that one rental, you treat your tenant like you only have 1. They feel important, they feel heard, you're less likely to have tenant turnover. When you have 20 tenants and you treat each one like they're important and they're heard, you're going to have less tenant turnover. But if you treat your properties like you have 100, you're not going to be the person going out to fix the fence. You're not going to be the person going out to swap out the light in the hallway. You're going to hire those things out. So it's not going to create so much more work every time you buy a rental that you'll want to buy more rentals. If you're the one doing all of the work because you only have 1 property, when you buy 2, it'll actually start to take time away from your family, time away from your job, and it'll start to negatively impact you. And your brain will subconsciously say, don't buy any more. But if you build those systems that helps keep the tenant turnover low, you are buying properties that make enough money so that you can hire people to do the work, you will want to buy more properties to the point that you can replace your W-2 income with it. You didn't create another job, right? Managing my properties at 2 hours a month, and it's an average. So most months it's 30 minutes. I'm basically checking to make sure payments were made.
Yep.
And then I'll have a tenant turnover and it takes 5 or 6 hours. So I balance that out through the year and I have 2 hours a month. In the beginning, when it felt like it took 20 hours a week to manage one tenant, if I kept those systems in place, I never would have bought another rental.
Yeah. Yeah. One, I love it. I think having the systems in place and just knowing you just got to get started. Once you get started, you can tweak and iterate is really important for anyone out there who's looking for passive income and to change their life from having a W-2 to saying, you know what, when I am 50, 60, 70 years old, I'm not worried about money and financial freedom. I have one final question for you. One Rental at a Time has been an incredible community. I also have seen so much success with it, and it's phenomenal to see all of these attendees here today in Vegas spending time to talk about how they have become financially free. What is the biggest takeaway or number one thing that you've gotten out of one rental at a time?
When you first start investing, this sentence comes to mind. A lot of your friends are going to feel threatened. A lot of your coworkers are going to not understand. They're going to be confused. They're going to say investing is gambling. You're going to have a lot of resistance from your friends and family and coworkers. And so you cannot change the people around you. You're going to have to change the people around you. And for me, that was getting around the people in the one rental at a time community where they actually celebrate your wins. They don't get jealous. They actually understand the language. When you talk about cash on cash return, it doesn't take a 20-minute conversation to explain what that means to somebody. And it's basically, I mean, take up any hobby. If you want to be really good at CrossFit, and if you're not in a CrossFit group, you're not going to be good. If you want to be good at rock climbing and you're not in a rock climbing group, you're not going to be good. But if you can get around a community of people doing this type of investing, making work optional, it's not only like a motivation factor, but it just becomes normal to be successful.
Yeah. Well, Dion, thanks so much. I always enjoy connecting with you, chatting with you. And I think the people you're surrounded with today and me surrounding myself by you is such an inspiration. So thanks so much for joining me today.